We're going to go quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end. These starts of the week are guys that we expect to outperform expectations, whether that's more of a chalk, auto start type guy that we expect to just explode. Maybe it's a guy who's a wide receiver 2, an RB2 that we think is going to outperform and finish in the top 12, whatever it might be. Let's get into our starts of the week here. I'll let you start it off, Alex, with your quarterback.
This first one is only for the bold. It's only for the bold. It's Daniel Jones, Danny Dimes against the Dallas Cowboys. It almost hurts to say because he's let me down so far this year. Luckily, I haven't really had to start him. I started him in our our Superflex Dynasty League one time, and he did okay. But Daniel Jones against the Dallas Cowboys, and this one's all about the matchup. I mean, the Giants are a little bit shorthanded. Sterling Shepard is out. Saquon Barkley is out. But this Dallas Cowboys team can't stop anybody. 2 weeks ago against Atlanta, gave up 4 touchdowns to Matt Ryan. 3 weeks ago, 4 touchdowns to Matt Ryan. 2 weeks ago, 5 touchdowns to Russell Wilson. Last week, they gave up 2 touchdowns to Baker Mayfield and 1 passing touchdown to Jarvis Landry. So I'm thinking Daniel Jones is going to be able to get it done against Dallas. We know the Dallas Cowboys are going to score points. We know the defense is weak. The Cowboys defense giving up 36 points per game so far this season. We talked about Slayton. I think he's in for a big day. Evan Ingram, sneaky 10 targets last week. I think he could bounce back as well. Another, sneaky week for Golden Tate in the flex for a high floor play. I think Daniel Jones is going to be throwing the ball a lot in this game. Even if he turns it over a couple times, I think the volume and the yardage could make him a really interesting stream if you're desperate.
Hey, like we said for Darius Slayton, if there's ever going to be a week to start him, it's this week. I think the same can be said for Danny Dimes, kind of plays to that. Why we're saying, hey, you can fire up Slayton this week. You can take the risk. I think more likely than not, he is going to, in a worst case scenario, Slayton, I think is going to give you, 12 points. We'll see if Danny Dimes can be more in that 20-plus range in this super soft matchup where he's going to be asked to do a lot without Saquon Barkley. But let's talk about my quarterback start of the week. It's Herbie. It's Justin Herbert.
Oh, my.
I'm willing to start him here against New Orleans on Monday Night Football, which that game might actually get relocated with Hurricane Delta coming in. Keep your eyes on that. I don't know if that really changes that much. Could maybe see a delay or something like that, but just keep your eyes on it. But assuming all is normal here, start Justin Herbert, pick him up. I picked him up in a lot of leagues where I had Cam Newton, and I need a spot start now and for the next couple of weeks because I love the matchups. But since he's taken over as the starter in week 2 out of nowhere, literally told during the pregame warmups, hey, you're going to start. Justin Herbert is the quarterback 10, and he's number 4 in the NFL right now in yards per attempt. This kid has an absolute cannon of an arm. He's making a lot of great plays. He is making some rookie mistakes, but for fantasy, we really don't care about that. And it's not like he's like a Gardner Minshew or a Kyler Murray where he's getting all this usage on the ground. I think there's still some room for him to increase there and give you a little bit more when they need to rely on him to do so. But you look at his true completion percentage, it's 4th in the NFL, right there with his yards per attempt at number 4, 78.6% true completion percentage. I legit think this kid is good. He's airing the ball out. He's not afraid to show no fear in the pocket at all, willing to take sacks, and hasn't made too many mistakes outside of a few questionable interceptions here and there. But I like Justin Herbert a lot. We know in this matchup, New Orleans is going to be able to move the ball. Their secondary does scare me a little bit, but they are a great matchup for quarterbacks so far on the year. New Orleans right now, 26th against the quarterback position. So it's actually a pretty good matchup for quarterbacks. I know some of that's been skewed in games against Matt Ryan, against Aaron Rodgers, guys like that, but I think you do a lot worse than Justin Herbert as a spot start now and beyond. And look, we love to take upside shots at the QB spot. That's why I was saying draft Cam Newton everywhere. That's why in years past, even this year, you want to go after these high upside rookies like a Joe Burrow, like a Kyler Murray, like a Patrick Mahomes, like a Lamar Jackson. These are all guys that before the season started, no one was really high on them, but I think we're realizing we're not as good at evaluating quarterback talent, us as a fantasy community, as we think we are. Justin Herbert's one of those reasons why a lot of guys were off on him before the year, but I think there's still plenty of upside that he's already shown. Hopefully he remains the starter rest of season if you're a Herbert fan. But I think here and for the next couple of weeks, Herbert, you got to plug him in.
It's risky business, Steph. I mean, you and I coming out hot here on the risky business. I love it. But I'm going to go ahead and get into my running back start of the week. Someone I'm really excited about. It's Mike Davis. And if you've had him on your roster for the past 2 weeks and you've seen the kind of performances he has given your team, I mean, there's no way you're not plugging him in, especially in a great matchup against the Atlanta Falcons. And something I just found out, which is crazy, is since week 2, so the last 3 weeks, Mike Davis is the RB6 in full PPR formats. Absolutely incredible. And with Mike Davis, we've seen him be the primary guy in this offense with the CMC role. 2 weeks ago, 76% of snaps. Last week, 74% of snaps. You absolutely love to see that for this Panthers team. He's getting a ton of receiving work as well. Past 3 games, 8 targets, 9 targets, 6 targets. Now with CMC out, he's getting the work on the ground as well. 13 attempts and 16 attempts in his 2 starts. So Mike Davis alone is getting it done. Now you got Reggie Bonifant, who's been backing him up, going on the IR. So Mike Davis is going to be the guy in this offense, and he's going to absolutely eat against this Atlanta Falcons team. We've talked about it, time and time again. The Falcons can't stop anybody right now, and I really don't think they're going to stop this Panthers offense either. This could be an incredibly high-scoring game. And when I look at this Falcons team, they've really struggled to stop the running back in the receiving game. Week 1 against Chris Carson, they gave up 6 receptions for 45 yards and 2 touchdowns. Against Ezekiel Elliott in week 2, 6 receptions for 33 yards. And then in week 4, this past week against the Packers, we saw Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams absolutely eat through the air. Jones had 5 catches, 40 yards, and a touchdown. Jamal Williams had 8 catches for 95 yards. So what Mike Davis does well is receive the ball. That's what he's doing in that CMC role. I think we could easily see him have 7, 8, 9 targets in this game. I think he's going to see 12 to 15 touches on the ground as well. If he gets into the end zone, he's going to have another 20-point performance for your fantasy team. He's a lock for me this week. I know it's a short-term solution, but I wish I had scooped Mike Davis off the waiver wire. I did not see him becoming an every week must start.
I don't think a lot of guys did. I don't think anybody expected a 28-year-old running back to come in who'd never really been proficient in the passing game and just absolutely dominate. So I don't know what that says more to, Mike Davis's ability. This is kind of this hidden gem, or if he's just being schemed to get all this volume and he's doing good things with it. So either way, love Mike Davis here in week 5. Keep plugging him in. Don't let the anti-name value make you a fade. Another guy that, for me, I'm not saying he's going to come out and have a 30-point week, but it's a guy that I'm hearing a lot of negative feedback on. It's David Johnson. David Johnson, the Houston Texans are up against the Jacksonville Jaguars, and even though things are happening with this front office in Houston, firing Bill O'Brien, do we even know yet who the interim coach is going to be? As far as I know, I have not seen that.
It's Romeo Crennel.
So Crennel taking over. I don't really know what that means for this team. It means that they're probably not going to be as good as we expected them to be. That's already happened so far this season. But a lot of people see Duke Johnson healthy and coming back. He's been an interesting waiver wire pickup in some leagues. I'm not in on that, even though I do think Duke Johnson will have his weeks. But you look at what David Johnson's been doing and how he's been using this offense, and I know the production hasn't been there. He's been more of a floor play so far after a big explosion in week 1 with 19 fantasy points against Kansas City. He had some tough matchups and then under-delivered here in week 4 against Minnesota with 11 fantasy points. Only played on 55% of snaps in that game, in a game where the Texans couldn't get anything going. But I think what Crennel is going to do is try to play conservative. They're not going to try to do anything crazy or risky here against Jacksonville. I think they're going to try to get their first win of the year on the Jags. And this Jacksonville defense has given up a ton on the ground. As of right now, they're 28th in the league. That's out of 32 teams against the running back position. Just gave up a monstrous 151 rushing yard performance and 3 touchdowns to Joe Mixon in Cincinnati. I think the Texans O-line is better than the one in Cincinnati. And for a guy that's going to get some volume, it's going to be double-digit touches. He hasn't had less than 11 touches in a game, or 11 carries, and usually sees 3 or 4 targets a game. So I think the volume's just going to continue to be there for David Johnson. Again, he's not this super high ceiling play, but in a week where a lot of guys are going to fade him, I think he's good for close to 20 points. He's going to be a safe, stable option. Keep plugging him in there as your RB2, especially if you're in a deeper league. I think you do a lot worse just because the matchup's great. I do have concerns long-term, but at least here in week 5, I think you're going to get enough from David Johnson. And David Johnson's been used a lot as a receiver. And I know that's with Duke Johnson being out has kind of skewed some of the numbers here. But it can't be ignored that even when Duke Johnson was in the game in week 1, David Johnson still saw 4 targets, and his receiving numbers and usage are actually pretty impressive despite what the box scores have said. He's number 1 amongst running backs right now in route participation, number 2 right now in the NFL in terms of routes run, and has played a couple snaps from the slot. So, assuming that the injuries happen, whether that's this week or later on in the year to Will Fuller, Brandon Cooks, whatever it might be, I think David Johnson has more receiving upside than a lot of guys are giving him credit for. Plug him in here in week 5. Don't fret. Don't look at the Bill O'Brien firing and say, hey, I'm just going to fade all these guys, because I think David Johnson will deliver this.
Yeah, I don't mind that one bit, Steph. Let's go ahead and move over to receivers. Mine's more of a chalk pick, but it's just my endorsement not to fade this guy. It's Robert Woods. He had a disappointing showing last week against the Giants. Only 6 receptions, 436 yards. Here's the thing with Robert Woods. Don't fade this guy. I know he's not the sexiest name, but last week to me is a throwaway game. That was just ugly on both sides of the football. And the thing about Robert Woods, he's still getting the snaps. 97% of snaps 2 weeks ago against Buffalo, 95% even in this tough game. He's always over 80% of snaps. He's been over 80% every game this season. Robert Woods is someone you got to plug in every single week. I know he doesn't have that huge upside, but the targets are going to be there. And against the Washington football team next week, I expect the Rams to be able to move the ball and to have some success in the passing game. I think Jared Goff has a pretty good week as well. So if you're thinking about fading Robert Woods, don't do it. Keep rolling him out there with confidence. He's still a must start every single game.
Yeah, got to keep sticking with Bobby Trees here. Been on him all year. Keep plugging him in. My start of the week is a guy that you probably were starting anyways, as we've seen his rise here, but I'm saying plug him in again in a great matchup. It's Justin Jefferson against Seattle on the road. He's played more than 75% of snaps over the last 2 weeks, 78 and 77%. He's officially passed Olabisi Johnson, is now the wide receiver 2 on this team. I'm willing to say that the breakout is real. You can't even look at this guy on the field and say that he is not legit. He looks incredible. Back-to-back over 100-yard receiving games. And now in a matchup against Seattle that should be a very high-scoring game. Seattle's defense hasn't been able to stop anybody at all whatsoever. They're dead last, 32nd in the league in terms of fantasy points given up to wide receivers. So you got to start Justin Jefferson in this matchup. And on top of that, something that we've seen this year is Kirk Cousins willing to air the ball out a little bit more. Right now, Cousins is 4th in the NFL with 22 deep ball attempts. That's 5.5 per game. That's a career high pretty much that he's seeing. He's 13th right now in air yards, 12th in completed air yards. He's had a lot of great throws. He's number 1 right now in the NFL amongst all quarterbacks in air yards per attempt. So the premium that you're going to get on any reception that Justin Jefferson has is extra yardage. I expect that to continue here in this matchup. And on top of all this, Justin Jefferson is leading the league in yards per target and yards per route run, 3rd in yards per reception. He's just getting yak. He's a yak monster, and he's able to play in the slot, playing about 30% of his snaps out of the slot. So they can line him up anywhere on the field. I think we just had to see him get ramped up over those first 2 weeks. He was a guy that, for me, he was my number 1 for redraft rookie wide receiver this year. It was a hot take to some. I had CeeDee Lamb and Jalen Reagor right under him. I faded too quick. I jumped off the Jets hype train too soon, but Justin Jefferson, plug him in here in week 5 if you have.
He's been great, Steph, and he can do a lot with a little, so I like that pick. Let's go ahead and move on to the tight end position. This is tough, man. Tight ends are brutal right now, and outside of the chalk names like your Andrews, Waller, Kelsey, Kittle, it gets really deep. So I'm going to go with Hayden Hurst against the Carolina Panthers. You know, if you drafted Hurst, you either took him late or maybe you got him as your second tight end. So, he's returned on value so far. I mean, he's the tight end 15, so a little bit disappointing, but he's averaging 10 fantasy points a game. He's been, fairly consistent. He's been 6 points, 18 points, 7 points, 9 points. For the tight end position, you could definitely do a lot worse. He at least had one pop game in there. But Hayden Hurst, he's still getting the snaps, still getting the targets, getting over 5 targets a game, closer to 6 actually, around 5.5. And the snaps are over 60% a game. So, I mean, he's out on the field. The targets have been there. And you look at this matchup against the Carolina Panthers, I think a lot of points are going to be scored in this game. The over-under is 54, so Vegas is expecting the same. And we've got these Falcons weapons. These pass catchers are banged up, and who knows what's going to happen with these guys. I mean, I do expect Calvin Ridley and Russell Gage to play in this game. Ridley definitely looked a little bit off last week. I expect him to get back to form, but Julio Jones is looking like he is going to miss. And if Julio is out, I think that does lead to a slight bump in production for Hayden Hurst. So just taking all these things into, putting them together and spitting them out, I think it means a really good opportunity for Hurst this week, knowing he's already seeing snaps and targets, knowing that some of the other options are going to be out and he could see a slight bump in usage. Then also looking at the matchup against Carolina, knowing Matt Ryan's going to have to throw the ball, knowing points are going to be put up on the board. I think it's a good week to roll out Hayden Hurst and hope for a solid fantasy day.
Very nice, very nice. My tight end start of the week is a guy that you probably forgot about, but a guy who's been a sneaky option pretty much week in, week out. His average is 8.8 fantasy points. Granted, he did have that kind of forced bye week because of that COVID cancellation in that Steelers-Titans matchup. But this week, Eric Ebron and the Steelers go up against the Philadelphia Eagles. They're giving up the third most fantasy points to the tight end position. And I think Ebron is a sneaky boom upside play this week. His average target distance is 5th amongst all tight ends. Again, this is only in 3 games played. And his yards per reception is top 10. So we just see what he's doing. We know he's going to be a red zone threat. I think he's going to be used in this game, and the matchup's really good. With how decimated this tight end market is, there's really not many guys that you can pick up off the waiver wire and plug in. We've talked about a couple of them. Maybe you look at Dalton Schultz. Maybe, Logan Thomas is one that you can maybe just stream for a week and then drop him. But Eric Ebron, I think, is a guy that you can plug in not only this week against Philadelphia, but in other matchups season long. We don't know if Deontay Johnson is going to be out there, but regardless whether he is or whether he's not, he didn't practice today. This is Wednesday when we're recording here. Either way, I'm willing to plug in Ebron as a high floor upside option here in week 5.
Very nice, very nice. Ebron has just as good a chance to score a touchdown as a lot of these middling tight ends. So love his chances to get into the end zone this week.